Simon & Schuster Audio Works presents Spock's World by Diane Duane. This program is read by George Takei with Leonard Nimoy as the voice of Spock.
Science Office's personal log, stardate 3022.114. The Enterprise remains in geosynchronous orbit around Earth for her much-needed post-mission refit, now at day 34 and proceeding according to schedule. Heavy repairs, such as the replacement of the port nacelles antimatter containment system, have been completed. The ship has now been moved out of the main space dock facility at San Francisco High to a parking spot over the North Atlantic, where Starfleet Gander is completing ship's reprovisioning. The major part of this, the complete replacement of the Enterprise's 15 million cubic meters of air, for which she was much overdue, was completed today. I trust this will put an end to Dr. McCoy's incessant complaints that the ship was beginning to smell like old sweat socks. With this work complete, I may turn my attention to other matters more interesting, such as the tuning and recalibration of the bridge instrumentation and the updating and refreshment of the ship's data libraries. Security upgrade and change of cipher locks on classified information in the ship's computers also continues. I have devised a new set of satchel codes, their structure derived from the usual source, and am planning a paper on the code algorithm for the mathematical journals. Ship status continues otherwise unchanged, not surprisingly, since almost all crew, including the captain, remain on liberty at this time, as they have for the past month. Normally, such a measure of peace and quiet would afford me an ideal opportunity to indulge in meditation, but I have been finding it difficult to achieve the inner calm that successful meditation requires in light of the events presently taking place on Vulcan. The actions and declarations of the secessionist lobbies grow daily more disturbing. If I were an emotional being, I doubtless would feel fear at what is happening, fear at the course toward which I see my world rushing headlong. But I am a Vulcan.
A door vanished, and the man walked into his room and stood still for a moment, then said the word that brought the door back behind him. His terminal was chiming softly. The man paused long enough to slip his dark cloak off. Beneath it, his tabard and trousers were dark too, somewhere between brown and black, his family's seal bound into the fabric in gold at the tabard's throat. It was diplomatic uniform, made more impressive by his stature, tall but not slender anymore. Late maturity had left its mark on his frame. His looks somewhat matched his dress. A man dark-haired, dark-eyed, deep-eyed, a hawk-faced man with no expression, at least none that most people here were competent to read. He waited a moment while the computer scrambling the link agreed with the one on the other end as to the 80-digit satchel krypton they would use to keep the link secure. He had the utmost confidence in the ciphering process. 96 standard years before, he had invented it. "Sarek," he said. He paused, listening as the voice that answered him spoke by the good offices of the computer, well above the frequencies that most people on this planet were capable of hearing. "By what majority?" "Very well. Whose was the request?" "Tell her I will come. If all the transportation connections work correctly, we will be there in 4.96 days. Out." Sarek touched another code on the screen, not bothering to scramble the communication this time. "This is Sarek. I am being recalled informally. Make the arrangements with the usual carriers and begin distributing my appointments between Svade and Teemnu." Tali, his attaché, answered.
"Affirmative. Being handled now. What reason shall we give the Federation Council and the immigration authorities?"
personal political business. The referendum has been called. I must speak for the proposal.
There was nothing about that in the packet this morning. Perhaps there's been an oversight.
No oversight. I was just notified. Call a press conference and issue the statement as soon as you have a context-positive translation.
Yes, sir. Out.
The Ambassador Extraordinary of Vulcan to the United Federation of Planets, and incidentally to Earth, turned away from the screen and sat down, very slowly, in a nearby chair. Sarek leaned back and closed his eyes, but the old calm had deserted him. If I fail in this, he thought, then my honor is in shreds, and my family will bear the stigma of it forever. We will be ostracized. If I succeed, then my honor is intact and my conscience will remain whole. But I will become an exile, and outcast, and Earth will no longer exist. Sarek got up to make the call he had been avoiding. On the bridge of the Enterprise, the comm console went off. Enterprise, Spock here. Sarek. Father, are you and Mother well? I had not thought you so far gone into human behavior, my son, as to begin indulging in small talk with me. Father, I rarely hear from you by voice transmission unless either you or Mother are not well. Therefore, my logic is intact for the moment. That line of reasoning is justifiable. However, your mother and I are both in good health. Then I would assume that your call has something to do with the vote that took place on Vulcan this morning. You have had the news? No, but it seems a reasonable assumption. What was the result? In favor of considering secession. 4,351 to 1,512. Then they have certainly called for you to return home and speak for the secessionists. They have. More. Tapouted. And will you? My son, you know my reasons. Too well, my father, but you must do your conscience's work. So must you. The consul has called for your testimony as well. I should have expected that. I will make the necessary notifications here and advise Starfleet, though I think I know what they will do. Agreed. I will see you at home, my son. I estimate that you will be there before me. Out. Spock touched a button on the arm of the helm. For just a moment, he sat looking at the peaceful Earth showing on the view screen. Then he got up, went to his science station, and began making calls. It was blowing up a gale outside the pub. Wind whipped rain against the windows gone glassy black with night, and rattled the damper in the fireplace. But on the whole, James T. Kirk was beyond caring. He was sitting in a chimney corner seat with his feet out in front of a coal fire, with an Irish whiskey in one hand. He was warm and snug, and he didn't have to go anywhere, and there was nothing to do but relax and listen to the wind mutter and moan in the flue. Only the fools and the desperate are coming out in this weather. It was Ronan Boyne, the Willow Grove's pub keeper. He sat down next to Jim in an old overstuffed horsehair chair. I wouldn't want to be out in it either.
Ah, but you must have seen worse. Ion storms and all.
Yes, but ions don't get you wet. Got time for some chess later?
You're on.
Jim sighed and put his head back against the padded wall behind him. He had come to the conclusion that Ireland was an extremely nice place to be lost in. There were not too many houses around here to mar the bleak loveliness of hill and water and sky. The towns themselves seemed to crouch down to 1 or 2 stories and make themselves small. And Dublin's fair city, where the girls were so pretty, had grown in many directions, but not this one. Only its spires could be seen away across the tidal flats of Dublin Bay. Civilization kept properly at a distance, where it would not frighten the horses. The Irish had their priorities. Talk was one of them, too. Jim doubted he'd talked as much in the past year as he had in the last month. Ronan was making his way over to Jim again, this time with the chess set. Uh-oh, phone. Kirk here.
Spock here, Captain. Are you busy?
Not at the moment, but I get the feeling I'm about to be.
Unfortunately, you are correct. I would suggest to you, Captain, that all liberties are about to be cancelled.
Noted. What's going on?
A vote was taken this morning, and Vulcan has decided to call the referendum. My presence will be required there, and I would strongly suspect that the Enterprise will be ordered there as well, to reinforce the planet's memory of favors done it in the past by the Federation.
There goes the vacation. Give me half an hour to check out of here, and I'll be ready to beam up.
Acknowledge. Enterprise out.
Jim looked up at Ronan. No chess tonight, Ronan. Sorry about that.
It's a wicked waste. That's what it is. But I'll get your bill ready.
Jim agreed that there was nothing to be done except get up from the pleasant fireplace and take care of business, and then wait for the communicator to go off again and say his goodbyes. That's me. You take care of yourself.
I'll do that. Gamertavad Hagasrath.
Pardon?
It's Irish. An old wayfarer's blessing. It translates as, live long and prosper.
I'll be back. Jim stepped out into the black, blowing night and shut the door behind him, holding onto it carefully so that it shouldn't slam in the wind. Several seconds later, the rain was blowing through the place where he had been. The bridge of the Enterprise looked a little strange when the lift doors opened on it, as home often does when one's been away from it for a while. Jim stepped out, nodded greeting at Uhura and Sulu, who gestured or smiled hello at him. He waved them back to what they were doing and glanced around to the science station. Spock was bent over it, making some adjustment. Jim sat down in the center seat and stretched his legs. Still hunting for perfection, Mr. Spock? Excellence, at least, sir. Spock straightened up, picked up a data pad, and stepped down to join Jim. The orders have come through from Starfleet. Here is today's schedule. Jim glanced down at it, tilted the pad slightly to scroll through it. Looks like we're ready to go. Of course. All transfer personnel are aboard, and all assigned personnel are at post or accounted for. Our scheduled rendezvous with Swiftsure is estimated on time in 1.13 and 1.6 days, respectively. Jim nodded. Fine. I see you'll be doing the situation analysis for the department head's briefing. It would seem I have the right qualifications. I also see that the crew first night party is scheduled a little late. Probably so that the senior officers can attend. Noted. Anything further here that needs my attention? Spock reached over Jim's shoulder and tapped the pad. It cycled ahead to one entry. The ship's computer bulletin board system has asked for the release of more core memory. What does Dr. McCoy say? He thinks it is therapeutic for the crew to have as much room as they need to discuss this mission. He went on at some length about the ship's gestalt and the fact that the recreation department is, after all, his responsibility. And it is. Opinions? Message traffic on the BBS has been up significantly in recent days, and it seems illogical to withhold what can be a valuable safety valve for humans. Right. Give them half again what they asked for. I'm going to get something to eat, Mr. Spock. I'll see you at the briefing. Mr. Chekhov.
Sir?
Plot us a course for Vulcan, Warp 2. Mr. Sulu, take us out of the system on impulse, 1/10 C, then warp us out. The officers' mess was one of the nicer parts of the ship, mostly because of its view. It was on the leading edge of the Enterprise's primary hull, with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave the illusion of sitting at the 23rd century equivalent of a ship's prow. Jim pulled the table screen close again on its swinging arm. Holding on it, amber on black, was a page of data.
For sale. Best quality Andorian Behiva. One careful owner. No dropouts. No lost meaning. Warranty still in force. 180 CR or best offer. Leave message in buy cell or email area 6.
Now what the devil is a Behiva? Jim thought, and kept reading. He scrolled through a few more messages, then decided to leave them for later. System? Change area to common room.
Common room. Opinion, informed and non. Ranting and raving permitted. Names not necessary.
It was one of the places he came to find out what his crew was thinking. Messages did not have to be attributed to a name or terminal, but they could not be private. Here tempers could flare, awful jokes could be told safely, suspicions be aired, rumors be shot down. The common room was sometimes a peaceful place, sometimes a powder keg. Jim never ignored it. He scanned through the most recent messages, and one caught his eye.
From Bugs. Date 4412.1100. Vulcans. Who needs them? They can't take care of themselves anymore. They can't even take care of a starship if you give it to them. And now they claim they're not good enough for us. Well, the hell with them, and the setup they rode in on. Just fooling.
Jim breathed out. Serious or not? The statement mirrored some he had heard on Earth as this crisis had built and brewed. There were quite a few replies, some along the lines of, maybe they've got a point. Maybe we aren't good enough for them, or good for them anyway. Other people said, we need them. Someone has to tell them so. Let's hope that someone here can get it through those thick Vulcan skulls of theirs. And Jim would heat up slightly under the collar. He was sure they were thinking of him. The problem was, so did Starfleet. Somehow they expected him to pull this rabbit out of the hat. The problem was, the rabbit was a Selat, and he didn't fully understand the shape of the hat. He thought he might never fully understand it, even if he lived to be as old as, well, as a Vulcan. And if he didn't come to understand it pretty damn fast, then there would no longer be Vulcans in the Federation to be as old as. Not to mention that he would suddenly be bereft of one of his two best friends. And Starfleet would come down very, very hard, right on his neck. He refused to try to choose which of those options bothered him more. Jim scrolled down through the messages. They were not all about Vulcans. Some of them were about investing your pay, or the nature of God, or the awful way the meatloaf from Commissary 5 tasted lately. Was the computer there having a crash or something? But Jim read right through them, the complaints, the hellos, the natterings, until he came to the one message that made him simply stop and stare at the screen.
From Larian, date 4412.301. Reply to Bugs 4412.1100. You're not thinking any more clearly than they are. It's not a question of whether we're good enough for them or not. They don't even know who we are, and they're going to judge us. But we've been judging us for thousands of years, and we don't know who we are either. So why all the noise? It won't matter until it's too late.
Jim looked up. Uranus slid into sight, slid past on the port side, glowing dim jade, its moons caught climbing topsy-turvy up one side of it as Enterprise passed. In a little while, the ship would go into warp. In little more than 2 days, they would be in orbit around Vulcan. It won't matter. Computer, log off. He spent some time gazing out into the darkness.
Science Officer's Personal Log, Stardate 3349.2. One could make a case that the present situation has its roots in the first meeting of Vulcans with another species, long before Earth people had even been heard of. Particular emphasis is placed on the period between circa Vulcan Old Date, 139,000, which approximately corresponds to Earth Old Date 900 BC. The Vulcans' first landing on the Vulcan neighbor planet Charis, known locally as Tikut, took place approximately 300 years before the birth of Serac. Exploration of the 40 Eridani star system by Vulcan continued through those 3 centuries without major incident. But at the end of that period, Vulcan had its first contact with another species, and the encounter was more than enough to send the planet into a xenophobic reaction that not even the influence of Serac, then alive, would be able to stop. There had been discussion since Vulcan spaceflight began of what the first contacts with alien life would be like. Generally, it was anticipated with pleasure, or at least great interest. Other life was by and large perceived as a marvel and would have been welcomed hospitably. But the pirates, who were the first to arrive, had no intent to merely be satisfied with the Vulcans' hospitality. They were invited into the system as the planet's guests, and a party of dignitaries agreed to meet with them regarding diplomatic relations. However, the pirates arrived with an invasion force, and the treaty group was taken hostage or killed. From such a point of perceived advantage, the pirates usually went on to subdue the planet in question by demands of ransom or outright destruction. They made the mistake, though, of assuming that the planet was unified and at peace, and therefore unarmed. Actually, the planet was in its most violent period of many. The pirates were driven out with bloody dispatch. Certainly, many Vulcans began to say that the only way to handle a universe full of aliens was to go out in power and subdue them, to become a terror ourselves. Others said that such vileness did not need to contaminate us. We should shut ourselves up in our planet with our own wars, which we at least understood, and let no stranger ever come near us again. Only Serac was able to bring the planet through that time, and he died of it.
The first night of mission party was as much a Starfleet requirement as it was a tradition and a pleasure. It was the best chance for the crew to celebrate their crewness, while also debriefing and getting mentally ready for the mission they were undertaking. A goodbye to Earth, a hello to one another and the galaxy. This one was as crammed as any other. Big crowds surrounded the two holographic game tanks. People of all species danced and sang, sat and talked, and ate and drank with great good cheer. Through the happy cacophony of voices, Harb Tanzer strolled, keeping an eye on things and making occasional mental notes on where the carpet would need cleaning tomorrow. Harb. It was a synthesized voice of the games and holography computer. Because of its complexity, it was able to have a personality, and Harb had had one installed as soon as he could, to his occasional regret. His computer had an independent streak, which hadn't done any harm so far, but it did make its job interesting sometimes. What's the scoop, Moira?
We're out of onion dip.
Harb rolled his eyes a little as the voice, focused for only him to hear, followed him slowly across the room. So, make some more.
No sooner said than done, boss.
Harb nodded satisfied and resumed his course across the room. As he went, someone said in his ear, "We're out of dip. Keep your pants on." Captain. I do try. Nice party, Mr. Tanzer. Harb smiled back as they began to stroll together through the crowds of people. Mr. Tanzer, I need to talk to you about something. Certainly, sir. We'll find a quiet corner. In here? I doubt it. Never mind. Have you been in the ship's BBS lately? I have. Do you find anything unusual about the level of discussion going on in the common room lately? You're worried about some of the anti-Vulcan feeling you've been seeing? Yes. Harb nodded a little. It's always been there, but when an opportunity like this comes along, it tends to come out more strongly. Jim shook his head. I just find it hard to believe that in this day and age, bigotry is still with us. Captain, I doubt if it's anything as complex as bigotry. Simple envy, more likely. For people who think Vulcans are a threat, there are all kinds of obvious reasons not to like the species. They're peaceful, they're extremely strong, they're mysterious. They have powers that normal people don't understand. I suppose you have a point. I'm not seriously worried. Sometimes in the BBS especially, sentiments like those get aired so that the people airing them can get them out of the way and move on to something else. But not always. I'll keep an eye on it. Sirens began whooping, and all around the room, people looked up suddenly and put their drinks down. But before anything else happened, Chekhov's voice came echoing very large over the all-call.
All hands, yellow alert for engineering and nav staff only. Rendezvous with USS Swiftsure in 30 seconds. Going sublight.
This caused a stir of pleasant excitement, and a lot of people made a rush for the observation window on the upper level of the wreck deck. Harb glanced at Jim. What was the reason for the rendezvous? Staff transfer? Jim nodded. We have some people destined for Vulcan, who've come in from some of the more remote star bases. Fleet detoured Swiftsure Inn to drop them off.
Breach to Captain Kirk.
Kirk here, Mr. Chekhov.
Our transfers are all aboard, Captain. We are ready to warp out.
Warp at your discretion, and thank Captain Warburg for me.
Hey, sir. Breach out.
Well, keep your eye on the BBS, as you say. I'm going to be a little busy pretty soon. Aye, aye. Harb's practiced eye glanced over the room, and he paused. Sarek walked in. He was holding out two paired fingers, and touching them with her own as she stepped through the door was Sarek's wife, Spock's mother, Amanda. She had always been a handsome woman. Now she was gorgeous. She was smaller and lighter than she had been once, but the effect this produced was to make her look like one in whom time had burned away non-essentials, leaving pure essence. And her hair was so perfect a shade of silver that it was enough to make one want to run out and see a professional hair colorist or a ghost. She wore a standard Vulcan lady's traveling clothes, long overtunic, soft breeches and soft boots, all quite logical, but when done in the heavy silks of Earth, luxurious and exotic looking as well. Harb leaned over to speak in Jim's ear. You knew they were coming? I had my suspicions. Ambassador, Lady Amanda, welcome aboard. Jim bowed over Amanda's free hand. It's been too long. It's good to be back, and in the middle of a party as well. A little entertainment will be pleasant before the deluge. Sarek's eyes flicked to Kirk a considering look. My wife speaks figuratively in the tradition of her people. Deluges are not common on Vulcan. My husband speaks circumspectly in the tradition of his. Captain, my son met us immediately upon our transport over from Swiftshore. I would welcome a chance to discuss matters with you before we reach Vulcan. Jim bowed slightly. Choose your time, Ambassador. I will be delighted to accommodate you. I believe your people have a saying. There is no time like the present. Excellent. The officers' lounge? Sarek nodded. As you wish. And if I may, I would like Dr. McCoy to attend. The doctor met me in the transporter room as well, to check his handiwork, as he put it. I had already taken the liberty of asking him. Then, let's go. They settled themselves in the lounge, Sarek, Spock, Amanda, and Kirk, with McCoy off by the wet bar, making a great show of mixing himself a mint julep while he listened to Jim. I had thought we weren't going to see you until Vulcan, sir. I had planned to take the usual commercial carriers, Captain, but someone at Starfleet got the idea that it might be wiser for me to see certain personnel here before setting foot on Vulcan. Jim nodded. I'm glad, because we're going to need some coaching. Spock has told us about the format of the debates in a general sort of way. I was pretty effective on the debating team at the Academy some time back, but debating Terrans is one thing. Debating Vulcans, I have occasionally lost. Captain, we have a great reputation for intelligence among the humanities, but I fear that our major weak point in that regard is our rigidity. McCoy glanced up at that. Or stubbornness, perhaps. A word with unfortunate emotional connotations, but possibly accurate. Doctor, this may come as a shock to you, but not all Vulcans are free of emotion. McCoy lifted one eyebrow in an extremely Vulcan mannerism, and said nothing. It's actually a linguistic problem at its root, Amanda said. There are Vulcan concepts that the Universal Translator System has been mishandling for many years. Ariemnu in particular. The concept keeps getting translated as lack of emotion or suppression of emotion. A more accurate translation would be passion's mastery. The word itself acknowledges that Vulcans do too have emotions, but are managing them rather than being managed by them. And though the translation has since been corrected, many people only remember the first one. Sarek looked at Amanda with an expression that Kirk suspected was very restrained affection, and said, So the problem perpetuates itself and resists solutions. Well, it is our business to impose a solution on it, of one sort or another. Jim thought for a moment about how to phrase the next question. Sir, Spock tells me that T'Pau is attempting to prevail upon you to take the position that Vulcan should secede. Are you going to do that? And if so, am I correct in believing that you are trying to assist our side of the argument nonetheless? T'Pau does not make attempts. What she sets out to do, she does. Captain, you understand that T'Pau could easily have me dismissed as ambassador to Earth if I defied her. Yes. Not that that fact by itself would necessarily stop me from doing my own will, though it is my business to voice my government's views. If they became intolerable to me, or I felt improper pressure was being put upon me, I would immediately resign. McCoy looked concerned. But you haven't done so. One must not act with unnecessary haste. I have not yet had a chance to talk personally with T'Pau. Until I have more data, Doctor, I cannot make final decisions. But when you have your data, if you feel you have to speak against the Federation, you will. Of course I will, Doctor. Here, as at most other times, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. What if I become convinced that my own people would be more damaged by remaining within the Federation than by leaving it? Must I not then preserve the species of which I am a part? But the important thing is that this matter be managed with logic, or rather, Cathia. I must not be misunderstood. Cathia must rule this, or we are all lost. I think I need a translation, Kirk said. It's obviously a Vulcan word, but I'm not familiar with it. That is possibly the worst aspect of this whole mess, Amanda explained. It's the modern Vulcan word which we translate as logic. But what it more correctly means is reality truth. The truth about the universe, the way things really are, rather than the way we would like them to be. McCoy nodded. And the problem is that the truth about what's needed looks different to everybody who faces this situation. Sarek's expression became unreadable. If I find I must defend the planet of my birth by turning against Earth, then I will do so. Alternately, if I find I can, in good conscience, defend the Federation in my testimony, I will do that. But what matters is that Cathia be observed without fail. Otherwise, all of this is useless. Jim nodded. And if you find you have to take the case against us, and it means you can never see your son again, or your wife, or that you have to go into exile. Now an expression appeared that could be read, just for a flicker of a moment. Anguish. Jim was instantly sorry he had seen it. McCoy had already turned his head away as Sarek spoke. Then, that is what will be. The short-term effects of a withdrawal from the Federation, our little personal loss and pain, the small matter of exile or estrangement, do not weigh significantly against the loss of the diversity, the well-being of a whole species, ours or yours. Here, at least as far as I am concerned, the needs of the many do indeed outweigh mine. My son and my wife will make their own decisions, and make them well. But for myself, I will serve my world as well as I may, regardless of the consequences. I estimate 1.6 days to Vulcan. Captain, if you have some time early in the ship's day tomorrow, I will go through some library material with you and give you some pointers on our debate structure. The doctor will doubtless want to look on, as there is a strong possibility he will be called as well. Certainly, Ambassador. Around 0.35, if you like. Excellent, Captain. I will then retire. My wife will attend me. Sarek stood up. All the rest rose as Amanda did. Good night, Captain. My son. As they left, McCoy looked after them with interest. Spock, your mother gets more special as time goes on. Spock nodded. Yes, but if you gentlemen will excuse me, I must go start preparing my own statement. Time is short. Certainly, Spock. Good night. Well, Bones, you're looking thoughtful. Cold feet? No. Well, yes, but that's not what has me thinking. What then? Just Sarek. Who was it said, the only thing worse than a scoundrel is a man of principle? Sounds like Twain or Averith. McCoy put his glass down, shaking his head. Vulcans. For so powerful a species, they sure are afraid. I wonder what of.
Science Officer's Personal Log, Stardate 3544.113. Logic is a taught way of life, one that affects some Vulcans more profoundly than others. Just as one religion or another, or one philosophy or another, will affect a given Earth person more or less profoundly than another. We are not of one mind any more than the people of Earth are. Some of us will regard the Terrans and the Federation with logic in place, and others will not. I have read the English language text of the official communique that was sent to the Federation High Council and paid particular attention to the wording. The statement is one of intent to consider withdrawing a prior legislation, that legislation being Vulcan's Articles of Association with the Federation. The document comes from one of the 3 Vulcan legislative bodies that exists only to repeal laws. The idea being that a law should require a fairly large consensus, and a bad law should be made easy to stop or change. The system is both logical and exploitable. There has been a considerable dependence on the rule of logic to keep good laws from being illogically removed, or bad ones from being illogically passed. But Vulcan is not quite heaven, I'm afraid. There are numerous parties and coalitions holding the view that Vulcans should have no association with a species that goes through the galaxy armed. Such association, they say, is inevitably a corrupting influence on the rule of peace and logic. For a long time, my father had been one of the staunchest adherents to this theory. He has been called back to the planet to give evidence on its behalf. It is doubtful that he would testify against his belief. But if T'Pau should call a Vulcan in to testify, she has considerable power to exert to see that just that happens. The mention of T'Pau makes everyone uncomfortable. Even for a Vulcan, she is an unusually powerful personality, powerful enough to be rather disturbing. I don't know if she is behind the movement. That is one of the things I must still discover, but of this much I am certain. The matter, as it stands now, could not have gotten so far without her approval, at least her tacit approval. There are also groups friendly to the Federation that believe Vulcan should disassociate itself. They believe that Vulcans are infringing on human rights, the Earth people's right to be Terran, that the Vulcan lifestyle cannot be allowed to influence the human lifestyle to its own detriment. There is one aspect of this situation which I find most fascinating, that never have all these groups, large and small, come together to coordinate their efforts. They always seemed to have too many points of disagreement, but many differences seem to have been suddenly resolved. The vetoing House has already agreed that Vulcan should leave the Federation, but T'Pau has prevailed on the Vulcan High Council to submit the matter to a debate plebiscite, the matter being too important for only legislators to determine. The debates are scheduled to begin shortly after our arrival, and will last as long as the planetary population finds it edifying to listen to the arguments. When a threshold number of viewers have indicated they want it stopped, some 2 billion, the vote will be called. I estimate the whole process to take about a week. How will I decide? I do not know. Logic must dictate my stance, most especially in my case, for I will be carefully watched, as carefully as my father, or T'Pau, or the captain. But if the vote is negative, all Vulcan bases, vessels, diplomatic personnel, starships, and starship personnel will be recalled. The Federation will cease to exist for Vulcan. They will, effectively, be dead to us.
Jim and Spock and McCoy found themselves standing in front of the Vulcan consulate, a building designed by an architect whose family Jim suspected of owning a glass factory. The afternoon there would have been something of a bore, except that Jim found himself in the company of someone whom he immediately and wholeheartedly disliked. The man's name was Shath, and he was one of the senior officials in charge of the debates. He was blond, which caused Jim to look at him with great interest when he and McCoy were first introduced to the man in the office at the consulate. The fair hair was a surprise, since blond Vulcans were rather rare. Also a surprise was the man's unconcealed coldness, not the cool reserve that Jim had grown used to on an everyday basis in Spock, but a genuine and purposeful shutting out. Spock had been escorted off by another consular official, a slender older woman. Shath led Jim and McCoy into a side office and left them sitting there alone, with nothing but a table and a computer console to keep them company, for almost half an hour. Then Shath returned, making no excuses whatever for the delay. He simply began interviewing them about their schedule and their intended itineraries. He acted as if he was being forced to be polite to monkeys. Jim answered Shath's questions politely enough, but next to him McCoy stirred several times, as if about to say something and stopping himself. Jim suspected what was going through McCoy's mind, but thought, what am I going to make a fuss about? I'm a starship captain and not being treated with the proper respect. Well, yes, but I am not going to allow myself to be nettled by mere rudeness. Very well, said Shath, breaking Jim's train of thought in a sharp tone of voice that no one used on a starship captain as far as Jim was concerned. You will be at the Hall of the Voice at point 3 2 days from today for your declarations. You may bring reference materials with you if you need them. That is all. The look in his eyes made it clear what Shath thought of anyone who needed to use notes for anything whatever. Jim opened his mouth to give the insolent creature a piece of his mind, but McCoy beat him to it. Shath, do you practice Cathia? The look on Shath's face was that of someone asked an embarrassing question by a parrot, annoyance and scorn.
I do, but not the part about the courtesy to guests, I take it. Kathia does not apply to Tviok, nor soon to any creatures of your sort. That will be all.
McCoy smiled. Jim had seen that smile before when McCoy was about to dress down one of his medical staff.
That's not all by a long sight. Tviok, huh? You are a rude little son. You're not past 50 yet, but you're still old enough to have some manners. Good thing I have too much to do this afternoon to be bothered tanning your hide. Come on, Jim. Let's leave this spoiled brat to his paper pushing.
There was something so outrageously provocative about Bones's tone of voice that Jim held in his initial reaction to it. He simply nodded at Shath and said, "Shath, long life and prosperity. Doctor?" He got up and followed Bones out. McCoy did not stop, but went straight out of the office into the corridor that led down to the tween-floor transporters. Jim spoke in his ear. "Now, what was that?" "Wait till we get outside." He would say nothing until they were out in the plaza in front of the building. They found a simple stone bench under several of what looked like prickly willow trees and sat down. "That lad up there, you recognize him?" "No." "Well, you were busy at the time, as I recall. He was at Spock's wedding." "He was?" "Sure enough. Just one of the crowd, but nonetheless I recognized him. It was that blonde hair. It caught me by surprise that first time." "He certainly was rude, though. He hated us. No, it wasn't hate. Contempt. We were dirt to him." "Correct. Anyway, I didn't want him to realize that I recognized him." McCoy leaned back against the tree, then said, "Ouch!" and bent forward again, rubbing his back. The tree had its own ideas about people leaning on it, and the idea took the form of spines about 1.5 inches long. Jim watched this with mild amusement, while the rest of his mind worried at the Shath problem. "By the way, what's Tviok?" "It's a pejorative. Auslander. Gaijin. Actually, it means neighbor, which tells you something. It implies that the person may live on the next piece of land, but they're competing with you for water and food, and you would prefer them to be under it rather than on it." "Charming. But do you think it's just Terrans he feels contemptuous of, rather than us in particular?" "I'm pretty sure. Remember, Jim, I've had a long time studying Spock's body language. Shath isn't all that different." "So you think Shath is just generally angry about humans?" "Angry enough not to show the proper courtesies, even when he knows we could complain and get him reprimanded. He seems awful sure of the vote going for secession." "How many more of them are like that? Out of all the Vulcans who'll vote?" "Bones, this is beginning to scare me." "Just now? I've been scared ever since I realized that my testimony might actually affect this outcome somehow." They sat quietly on the bench for a few moments before Jim spoke again. "I'm not used to running into that kind of thing from a Vulcan. They're always so controlled. The thought of what a whole bunch of angry Vulcans would be like if they let go. That thought scared them too some time back, and it looks like that's the only thing that's kept them here this long. Which reminds me, my translator didn't do anything with that word. Do you suppose the thing's on the blink again? You just replaced my interdermal transponder a couple of weeks ago." McCoy shook his head, smiling slightly. "No, that's not the problem. I took a second-level RNA language course while I was on leave. I was worried about exactly this situation coming to pass. I was watching the news, and so I stayed at home and did the course." "Instead of going to Bali for your vacation?" Bones shrugged. Jim looked at him in astonishment. Not many people chose to learn languages by chemical means anymore. Most people preferred to simply use the universal translator in one of its portable forms and update its data when necessary. The RNA series did have advantages, though, mostly in much increased fluency. Spock came across the plaza and stopped in front of them. Was there some problem, Captain? You seem to spend very little time in the consulate. We did the business we had to do. No problem. You missed McCoy, tanning one of your people's hides, though. McCoy stretched lazily while Spock looked at him in total non-comprehension. Vulcans do not tan, Doctor. It depends on what you soak the pelt in after you get it off. I must confess that I do not understand you. Lefkahich. Jim's translator rendered that clearly as, "Oh, yes, you do." McCoy continued, "Come on. I want to do some shopping, and we'll tell you the whole thing as we go." Fascinating. They headed off into the hot, bright afternoon. Later in the transporter room, they spent no more than a few moments inspecting one another's dress uniforms before they got up onto the pads. The world dissolved and reformed itself into a dusky landscape, all sand and stone, over which stretched a tawny darkness filled with stars. The sunset was now almost completely faded down from an earlier splendor that must have been enough to blind the eyes of anyone not Vulcan. They were standing in a great open space outside the walls of the Academy itself. The expanse of silvery sand ran featureless from where the three of them stood, nearly to the horizon, where a range of low hills lay silhouetted against the crimson and golden glory of the sky. Lord, look at that. Jim turned away from the horizon and the sunset, and actually took a step back from the massive pile of stone that stood, lined sharply as a cutout against the rising bulk of Vulcan's huge moon, Takut. It was a castle, or looked like one, but no castle so large had ever been thought of on Earth. It looked to have been carved out of a whole mountain. This is Pelasht, Spock said. It was a fortress once, when this was the only place for thousands of miles where water sprang from the stone. For ages, wars were fought for possession of it. Then Surak came, and when the fighting stopped and the Academy grew up here, Pelasht became its ceremonial house and banqueting hall. Shall we go in? Well documented, but not well enough for you to have seen it. Too busy reading about football? Anyway, don't bother looking it up. I'll tell you myself. In the last 180 years, there have been 29 violations during the exploration of 23,000 planets by the various branches of Starfleet. And don't start with me about the Enterprise and her purported record. There have been 5 violations out of 633 planets visited over the last 5 years.
And all those violations have taken place under a Terran captaincy.
Oh my, can it be that Vulcan is leaving the Federation because someone here doesn't like James T. Kirk? What an amazing idea, though it would go nicely with some rumors I've been hearing. Bones strolled calmly around the stage for a moment, while Jim and Spock looked at one another, slightly startled. At any rate, I was talking about bandages. There's no arguing about the fact that Vulcans and Terrans have had a lot of arguments about trade, weapons policy, exploration, protocol of running a Vulcan space service, you name it.
And every one of those arguments turns into a bandage over one of the other species' hurts. Now you would destroy all that hard-built cooperation at one blow. Rip off all the bandages at once, yours and ours together.
We can bind up our own wounds. And when two species are no longer going to be cooperating, what does it really matter about the others?
McCoy gazed up at him. A spear in the other's heart is a spear in your own. You are he. A great silence fell. So much for the man who claims to speak for a majority of all right-thinking Vulcans. You see that there is at least one Vulcan he does not speak for. Serac. Jim and Spock looked at each other in utter satisfaction. McCoy strolled about calmly on the stage for a moment, as if waiting to see whether Selv would come up with anything further. Can't have Vulcan without Serac. Most irregular. But a few of you would seem quite ready to throw him out along with us. He kept strolling, his hands clasped behind him again, and he gazed absently at the floor as he walked. Then suddenly he looked up. We are what he was preparing you for. Don't you see that? Infinite diversity in infinite combinations. That means people who breathe methane, and people who hang upside down from the ceiling. And it means us. An aggressive, nasty, brutish little species. One that maybe reminds you a little too much of yourselves a while ago. Confused and angry and afraid. You met us and welcomed us, though you had understandable reservations. And since then, there have been arguments, but generally, things have been working out all right. If you throw us out, beware that you don't take the first step in throwing out Serac as well. The first fear he taught you to move through was the fear of one another. Unlearn that lesson, and you're likely to repeat your old mistakes in the future. Serac would be very disappointed in you if you blew up the planet. And so would we. McCoy straightened after a moment and lifted the parted hand. Live long and prosper, he said in Vulcan, and walked off the stage. McCoy found his way back to his seat, then looked at Spock a little challengingly. That was just about every argument I've ever had with you rolled into one package. Then, I would say you won. McCoy shot a glance at him and grinned. Thanks. Jim chuckled. Pity you weren't on last. You would have brought the house down. McCoy looked a bit grim. I would have preferred that placement.
Number 7,
Shath said from the stage. Sarek stepped up.
Sarek, he said. I hold the rank of Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to Terra and to the United Federation of Planets from the planet Vulcan. And as regards the proposition, I say yea.
He stood there, immobile, in the shafts of sunlight, and they struck down on his darkness and could not lighten it. More than ever to Jim, he looked like a carved statue of a Vulcan, rather than a living man whom he had heard pleading against this eventuality the other night.
This is a bitter duty for me. My personal affiliations with Terra are well known. There have been some who have said before that those affiliations have made me unfit for my duty. I will not deal with that now.
He looked toward where Jim and Spock and McCoy sat, and Jim shivered at the pain in the regard. It was that look again, though it sealed over quickly.
I rejoice in following the doctor, an old acquaintance. I should like to note the facility with which he quotes Sirach. On Earth, there is a saying that the devil can quote scripture to his purpose. We have never desired that other species should necessarily adopt Sirach's teachings. Nevertheless, especially on Earth, this seems to have happened. Terrans have seen many good things, or things they prematurely conceived as good for them, and adopted them wholeheartedly. But they also seem to throw away large parts of their own culture, customs, languages, and so forth. There are many examples of this kind of behavior, enough to make us wonder whether it is wise for our culture to have much contact with Earth. We are concerned that our culture may already have done Earth's irreparable harm and turned it away from courses determined by its own structure. There is enough Vulcan blood on our hands. We have no desire to add human blood to it, no matter how figuratively.
Sarek took a long breath and turned to face another part of the hall.
Despite the Federation's statements that they desire peace, and we do not discount the sincerity of these statements, many of us have noticed that the result of Terran's involvement with almost anything is turbulence, difficulty, and strife. While not wishing to impugn the Doctor's statements regarding the philosophy of the Idic, still it is said, again by Sirach, that one can best judge what a person really intended by the result they produce, and it seems wiser to enjoy the Terran's diversity from a distance.
Sarek gazed downward for a long moment before he spoke again.
Our sociological and ethical structures are built on the science of the mind rather than that of the hand. Action, rather than contemplation, is the basis for the ethical structure of Earth, which, it must be admitted, dominates the Federation and its policies. And the two different structures seem to admit of no compromise.
Jim breathed out in discomfort, seeing Sarek's face holding so very still, with that consummate control of his, the pain that had to be under it.
And this Earth domination of the Federation is at the heart of the problem. We hold, as the Federation claims to, that no species has the right to impose its ethic or beliefs on any other species for whatever reason. But again, the results declare the intention. The political decisions of many planets are decided in terms not of what the electorates of those planets desire, but what the Federation wants. We are no longer desirous to remain in association with an organization that behaves in such a manner. We wish the Earth well, and all the peoples of the Federation, but we must quit their society. The government does not specifically request such a vote of the electorate. It merely asks that you consider the topic well before you decide.
Sarek sagged a little.
With that said, I must add something personal. My loyalties as a servant of my government are clear-cut, but I now find that my loyalties to my family are in such conflict with them that I have been forced to choose between them. Therefore, I must step down from my post, effective immediately. And I thank you and the government for your support of me in the past.
and wish that you may all prosper and live long. The stir went right around the room and would not quiet. Sarek stood in the middle of it all and did not move. But then a voice was raised. McCoy's.
Sir, before you go any further, would you mind telling us one more of the government's opinions? What do they think of the scheme to sell off formerly Federation-owned property on Vulcan after the secession to secret buyers with strong anti-Federation leanings who have already made substantial payoffs to Vulcan officials to ensure that the property will be sold to them at lowest bid before anyone else hears about it? Just curious.
Spock stared at Jim, and Jim at Spock, and both of them at McCoy. Bones leaned back, looking casual. Sarek looked stunned.
Doctor, I should want to see substantiation of such claims before I or my government could comment.
Sir, I'll wait your convenience.
And the room went mad. Doctor, Sarek said, sounding quite severe, I am ready to hear the substantiation of your claim. They were standing outside the Hall of the Voice.
I don't have the hard copy with me. Also, I need to satisfy you as to the bona fides of the source. We need to be up on the Enterprise.
McCoy cocked an eye at Jim. Slightly nettled, Jim flipped his communicator open. Kirk to Enterprise. 4 to beam up.
Make that 5.
Amanda's voice said from behind them.
I'm sorry I wasn't able to sit with you this morning, but at least I didn't miss any of the excitement.
Jim nodded. 5. Bones, you might tell me when you have these things up your sleeve. It would make my life a little calmer.
I didn't know until this morning. That moment seemed perfect to me, so I carped the diem, as we used to say in medical school.
The transporter effect set in. A moment later, they all got down off the pads and headed for the turbo lift. Sarek glanced over McCoy. I must admit that I admire your timing, if this data is accurate.
You'll judge for yourself, but I had to do something. You're so damn sincere, even when you hate what you're saying.
Sarek looked rueful. Was it that obvious? Jim laughed. To a human, it was rather noticeable. I have said distasteful things on behalf of my government before, but never one quite so much so. Still, that is no excuse. McCoy shook his head.
Never mind. It's going to be all right. Rec 1.
Spock looked astonished. Doctor, this is no time for a game of tennis. As for you, you've been had, Spock, old son. Had? Spock looked indignant, and one eyebrow attempted to ascend above his hairline.
I want to thank you for taking the time last night to tell me about your conversation with T'Pring, because something occurred to me about 3 in the morning. She talks a good game, does T'Pring, but not quite good enough. Nobody makes that much money just like that. And consider the kind of money T'Pring has needed to do the kind of dirt she was discussing with you yesterday. She couldn't have openly made that much without being noticed. So, as regards her explanation, it is incomplete, though you bought it. Spock looked both annoyed and sheepish, though he covered the expression over quickly enough. I fear my logic is not clear where T'Pring is concerned. McCoy rolled his eyes at Spock. And why should it be, for pity's sake? Never mind that either. I just want to get to the bottom of all this. Come on. The wreck deck doors slid open for them. There was no one there, rather odd at that time of day. Harb Tanzer came out to meet them. "Doctor, I cleared the place as you asked." "Good. Let's use the little tank, the one with a printout." Harb led them over to the smaller 3D tank. "Y'all might as well sit. The printout will probably take some time." McCoy perched on the arm of Sarek's chair. "Mara."
Good afternoon, Doctor.
"Would you do me a favor and print me out the material you retrieved last night?" The printer began to silently spit out pages as McCoy turned to the rest of them. "When I realized that T'Pring had to be getting a lot of money from somewhere else, I began to think about where. And something occurred to me. What happens when the Federation is kicked off Vulcan?" His audience looked at him somewhat blankly. "Well, we all have to leave." "Ah, but Amanda, private persons can take their property with them, or sell it. Property held by the Federation, though, was never sold to us, only leased, and it reverts to the Vulcan government. They won't want to keep all of it, especially the quasi-military installations. Those would be dismantled and the land used for other purposes. Right, Sarek?" "It would be logical." "Well, consider. Someone who knew that the secession issue would come up could easily go to the interests that have had an eye on that land and offer to make sure it was offered to them before anyone else. For consideration, that person would bribe a government official in a high place to see to it. The bribe would come from what that person was paid, of course. They would skim off the rest for themselves as their finder's fee. The bribery could be lucrative, for the Federation has a lot of property on Vulcan." Sarek's eyes were hooded. He was beginning to look angry. McCoy went on. "If the industrial contacts knew how their money was being used to run advertising campaigns that could ensure the secession, they'd probably donate extra to the cause. And so the racket would go, one side of it feeding the other. The person managing it from behind could make a nice wad. So could the government contact. However useful this information is, Doctor, I want to know how you laid hands on it. There should have been no way to break into the system." "There isn't, not unless you have a friend in high places." McCoy gestured with one thumb at the middle of the air. Harb Tanzer stared at him. "Moira, you've got my game machine hacking into strange computers and stealing data?"
But it was the right thing to do, sir. Dr. McCoy explained the situation to me, and he is my superior officer. So I asked the bridge computers to handle the downlink, and as for the satchel codes, they appear in various altered forms of my own programming, because it was Mr. Spock who designed them.
"From my algorithms?"
"Yes. Well, Father, they were the best and most complex available."
"Sarek, does the data bear out my allegations?" "It does, and adds some most interesting data. This government connection." "Shath? Yes, and a few others on his payroll, and one of the high counselors. Pretty can of worms, isn't it?" "That does not begin to describe it. So here's a very interesting weapon put in your hands at a useful time. Are you going to use it?" Sarek frowned. "First, T'Pau must see these. After that, I would recommend to her that we confidentially send copies to the guilty parties and then give them a chance to come clean about the attempts to bribe them. As regards the government officials, corruption at these levels is a dreadful thing. I must see T'Pau. In the meantime, Captain, you are speaking this afternoon, are you not?" Jim nodded. "As well as Bones did, I hope." "I hope so, too."
Number 18,
said the Vulcan who was doing the introductions. For some reason, it was not Chef. My name is James T. Kirk. I hold the permanent rank of Captain in the Starfleet of the United Federation of Planets. To the proposition, I say nay. He was shaking all over inside, worse than he would have done on the bridge, where he knew which orders to give, what to do. Fighting with words he understood, but fighting in this particular arena was still intimidating. There was so much to lose. I'm not very sure where to start. There is a perception on Earth of Vulcan as a neighbor, and neighbors you are. In this big galaxy, what's 12 light years among friends? We would be sorry to lose you. There's no way to explain in logic precisely what it is about you that we'd be sorry to lose. He walked around a bit. It gave him time to hunt words, since most of the ones he had planned to speak seemed to have deserted him. You people have courage. Something like 40% of the mapping of this part of the galaxy was done by Vulcan teams. People in little scout ships going out into danger because exploration was a logical thing to do. But the courage was always there, and it has never stopped. Also, you keep us honest. You are an honorable people. You keep your commitments and your word. A Vulcan promise is one of the solidest things there are. It's a peculiar thing, but many Earth people will sooner trust a Vulcan than an Earth person. He smiled a little ruefully. It says something about us, too. I'm not sure you're not good for us, though certainly we have no desire to be made into Vulcans, or to make you into us.
Your government's policies do not always seem to bear that out.
Well, the system isn't a perfect one. We're still feeling our way around, trying to find something that works perfectly, though it may be that perfection and government, in this world at least, are mutually exclusive terms. There was a little stir at that. Apparently the news of McCoy's little bombshell had hit the Vulcan news service. At any rate, as one of the governed, what I say is that I don't want Vulcans to be anything but Vulcan. But I have yet to see any evidence that we're stopping you from being Vulcan, or interfering in the process. Are either of those really likely when dealing with a civilization so old and energetic? And if you're concerned that Terra is too malleable to bear contact with Vulcan, I'm surprised we're having these discussions only now, 180 years after our association began. Look, I am living proof of a kind of friendship available for Vulcans among humans. I'm not claiming that the friendship is perfect, or ever was, but mostly my experience of Vulcans, and the one I work with, has been of great courage, intelligence, and insatiable curiosity, and compassion, and a great openness of mind. I thought those were Vulcan traits. I would be sorry to be wrong. There was a movement off to his side. He looked over, surprised, as Sarek hastened up on the stage. There is an emergency. I must ask the captain to come with me immediately. I beg the Assembly's indulgence and ask that he be allowed to complete his statement tomorrow. And Sarek grabbed Jim's arm in a grip of steel and hustled him off, leaving the audience murmuring. Jim said to him, completely befuddled, "What's the matter?" "Jim, we must hurry. T'Pau is dying." Jim beamed out with Sarek from outside the hall. When they materialized, they were in a large room done in warm colors and filled with unobtrusive machinery. Several parts of the room were concealed by the soft, opaque glow of positionable, non-sound permeable force fields. McCoy put his head out through one of them, and seeing Jim and Sarek, beckoned urgently to them. They stepped through the field after him. T'Pau lay there, unconscious, in a Vulcan-style diagnostic bed, with Amanda and Spock on either side of her. Next to Amanda, a woman in a soft brown tunic with long dark hair was looking at the diagnostic panel.
"How is she, Dr. Tishevat?"
Sarek said.
"She has been slipping in and out. This is normal for her condition, but it is not a good sign."
McCoy nodded and looked over at Jim. "Liver failure. She's past the point where even the healing trance would do her any good."
Tishevat shook her head. "She has forbidden it to be initiated. Her declaration of refusal of heroic measures has been on file with us for 10 years. I will be within call if I'm needed."
She slipped out through the field. Jim looked down at T'Pau sadly. T'Pau's eyes opened, and she looked up at him and the others, then at Sarek.
"I regret my lapse in timing. I was attempting to forestall this collapse as long as possible. It seems there are things—"
Her breath gave out. She lay there a moment, getting it back.
"Sarek, you have asked my counsel about what should be done with this material. Your plan is too subtle. You must tell the truth about it, and at once."
"Simply give the information to the media."
"The truth is able to care for itself, but it must be set free. Release the information immediately."
"I will do so." But Sarek did not move. T'Pau was looking at Spock and Kirk standing together by the side of her bed.
"When I first saw the two together, I thought that I should see one or the other of thee die."
And she smiled a little, an astonishing look on that face that usually seemed as if a smile might crack it.
"Now see how incorrect thought traps us in the end. For I little thought that I should see thee two together again, but that the death should be mine."
"I would have liked to know you better. I'm sorry I haven't had the chance." "I too," Spock said, and then reached out and took her hand.
"Yes."
She looked around at them all.
"I shall go now. There is no use waiting to see when it will happen."
Sarek took a slow step forward.
"No, you do not need this gift, son of my house. You will be head of Sarak's ancient house now, and you would have difficulty dealing with my Katra as well. No."
She turned her head and looked up at Amanda.
"I think we will do well together, my daughter. You have the necessary training from Mount Zalea to manage what I shall leave you, and it will qualify you as eldest mother of the house. Whatever others may say, best to so manage matters, if you consent."
Amanda's eyes were full of tears.
"Of course I do. Let it be done so."
T'Pau reached up one shaking, wrinkled hand to Amanda, who took it and pressed it gently to her face. For a moment, both their eyes closed. The withered lips whispered something inaudible. Amanda nodded. Slowly, T'Pau's breathing stopped. Amanda let go the hand, laid it on the coverlet, straightened up slowly.
"It's done."
The Shevat looked in. "She is with the other," Sarek said.
"I agree with you. all Vulcan will grieve with you.
Did she leave instructions with you?
She is to be cremated, and her ashes scattered on the sands of the forge.
We will see to it, then. The doctor bowed again and left. One by one, they all stepped through the field and stood outside it a moment. Now what? Now we will tell her world that she is gone. But Amanda stopped him. No, my husband. There was an odd note in Amanda's voice, and everyone looked at her. What?
No. You must tell them about T'Pring's plotting first, and you must tell them who has been notified. Then tell them about T'Pau. She will would not have liked to have her personal life take precedence over the proper running of the government.
Sarek looked at Amanda as if he had never seen her before, then nodded. Very well. Let us be about it. They left the clinic, Jim and Spock last of all, and Jim was wondering a great deal about the small, odd smile on Amanda's face. The first piece of news threw the planet in an uproar. There were accusations, denials, carefully worded protestations of innocence. The debates went on. Jim declined a second session of testimony, feeling he had said what he needed to. The second piece of news brought the planet to a standstill. The streets grew empty of people. The news service did little but talk, in a muted way, about T'Pau's life. Jim went with the family that night to the sands of the great desert near Selea, the forge. When they beamed out, Sarek was carrying a small, pale green porcelain container, exquisitely made. What none of them were expecting when they arrived were the 3 million Vulcans gathered around the edge of the forge, the largest single gathering of people in the history of the Federation. All silent, all waiting. Jim was staggered. Sarek stood there a while in the silence, listening to the wind blow, and finally came the sign he was waiting for. There was a bulge of light against the horizon, a glowing, ruddy curve. Sarek stepped forward. Here is what is left of her, he said to the night. He did not raise his voice, but all the hairs stood up on Jim's neck as he had a sudden sense of the sound of that voice being passed from mind to mind, right around the great desert, and held in every mind at once. He found it hard to bear, but Amanda seemed untroubled, and McCoy was standing there with his eyes closed, perhaps in prayer. Sarek opened the porcelain container to the light wind that had sprung up. We give her remains to the night from which we arose. Surely we know that this is not she. She and the other know it well, and we wish her well in whatever may befall, till the moon is no longer, and the stars are no more. The wind carried the dust away into the silence. Vulcan's moon Tukut slipped hugely upward in silence, flooding the ocean of sand with red gold light. Sarek looked up at the silent glory. Light with her always, and with us. And he turned away.
Science Officer's Personal Log, Stardate 3933.2. I was the 23rd to speak before the Assembly, and the last. It was a most difficult time to have to present any kind of case. My family was in mourning today, but the one whom we mourned would have desired that we continue the business which had brought us here. I found myself in a peculiar position as a son of the tradition that now debated casting Earth out, yet also a son of Earth itself. I could allow neither side to unduly influence me. What mattered was doing what was right, not merely blindly defending what was attacked. I was concerned with the damage our emotions might do one another. We are right to be concerned, perhaps. Over the millennia, millions of people have been killed on Vulcan, due to the lack of management of emotion. But it is possible to overdo this concern, to err in the direction of too much caution. I am a Vulcan, bred to peace. My suspicion is that breeding is more robust than most of us allow ourselves to believe. It seems too much like ego, like self-aggrandizement, to openly say, "We are strong." And so we pretend not to be, and do ourselves more harm than if we simply admitted our strength and moved on. For some time now, I have been privileged to serve with some of the finest beings that any Vulcan could imagine. I first came among them, seeing them as unstable, illogical, potentially dangerous. It had taken time to find out otherwise. I spent years watching humans wrestle with their emotions, and from their wins and losses alike I discovered something, that those who wrestle with their emotions learn far more about mastering them than those who hide or suppress them. I concluded from this that we have a great deal to learn from humans. It is illogical to ignore such a power, illogical to turn away from another species which has taught us so much about our own fears and our own hopes, and has shared so many of its fears and hopes with us. I am determined not to turn my back on such a species. I could not. I am of them. My choice is made.
A slender little official, a woman with the first curly hair Jim had seen on a Vulcan, stepped up to the stage.
I must inform you now that the threshold number of notifications to stop debate has now been received. Voting on the motion will begin immediately and conclude in 1 solar day, or 22.1 Federation Standard Hours. Thank you all for your attention.
Jim got up from his seat as many other people did. Beside him, McCoy stretched lazily and stood up too.
Now what?
Bones said as Spock came up to them. Now, Jim said, we wait. They spent the night at Sarek's and Amanda's, eating and drinking and talking, and occasionally bringing up the news on the computer to look at it. There was nothing about the vote. All the information would be correlated in one central computer at Shikar, and would be released only when the vote was complete. Finally, at exactly 1 Vulcan day after Spock had stepped down from that stage, the image in the tank flickered, and they found themselves looking at a simple 3D display of letters and numbers. Jim couldn't read them, but McCoy read them out loud. For secession, 5,400,380,605. Against secession, 9 billion. Jim whooped. Sarek leaned back in his chair. Amanda grinned, and McCoy grinned too, and squeezed her hand. Spock looked over at Jim and put up one eyebrow. I seem to have won my side bet, he said, and he turned to McCoy. I believe the correct phrase is ante up. The next night, they sat in the wreck deck again in the middle of a large impromptu celebration. A group of about 100 crew folks, mostly human, had surrounded Spock earlier in the evening and sung "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow," accompanied by 20 crewmen on kazoos. Sarek had been given champagne. The two of them had taken it all in good stead, but Sarek had privately gone off to McCoy's office afterwards. Champagne gave him an acid stomach. He had come back, of course, and they had commandeered one of the conversation pits in the corner. The party would probably close down fairly early, since tomorrow the ship went back on patrol, and Sarek and Amanda went back to their work, more of it than usual, since they were now joint heads of Sarak's house.
"We will do all right," Amanda said. "T'Pau left the house accounts in good order, as you might expect. It's mostly a matter of handling trusts and internal politics, but for a family of about 800,000 people."
And I thought I had a lot of cousins.
Sarek was looking a touch somber. "Anything wrong, Ambassador?" "No. I was simply thinking about the way this has all turned out. I am not sure T'Pau would have been pleased. She was very concerned that people's decisions about secession should have been dictated by their own informed opinions about the issue, not by ancillary issues. That does not seem to have happened. But on the other hand, I must agree with her that it seems best to simply have released the truth." McCoy leaned back and stretched.
I have to smile a little, though, over that line of hers about her bad timing. I'm not sure it wasn't perfect.
Jim looked at Bones, slightly confused. "Huh?" But Sarek nodded. "You have a point, Doctor. Captain, consider how the situation began to look to a Vulcan. T'Pau went out of her way while dying to give her Katra to a woman of Earth. This made it perfectly clear what she really thought of Earth people, despite what she might or might not have said about them in policy. But more, in so doing, she made Amanda eldest mother of Sarak's house. If the vote for secession went through, the Vulcan people would have had to face the fact that they themselves had cast the eldest mother of Sarak's house off the planet, and the head of house as well, for I would not stay. And most specifically, the first release to the news agencies made it plain that she had been notified about D'Pring's activities. The news of her death," Kirk finished the thought, "it made it look like the discovery of such dishonor in the government, directed against an Earth person, had killed her." Sarek nodded slowly. So did McCoy.
That's why I was amused a little in retrospect about her apology for her timing. I think it was right on, and I think she knew as much perfectly well. She died exactly at the time when it would do the most good.
The party began to ebb away after a while, and Sarek and Amanda took their leave. Jim and Spock and Bones waved to them and stayed put themselves for another hour or so. Finally, Spock got up. "Captain, I will see you in the morning."
Business as usual, eh?
Finally, yes, and much to my relief. Good evening, gentlemen. McCoy got up too.
Me too, Spock. Wait up. You coming, Jim? In a little while. Night, you two. Good night.
Jim sat still until the place was quite empty. It took some time. Then, "Moira," he said to the empty air.
"You rang?"
Or should I say, Lorien?
Now, Captain. I know who it is, but confidentiality forbids.
Confidentiality fiddlestick. Moira, you know how Starfleet feels about computers with personalities. It's a gray area at best.
It's not my fault if I like being conscious.
No, I can hardly blame you for that, or for playing at being human.
Your intelligence is just electrons, the same as mine. You always seem too intelligent to be a protean chauvinist, Captain.
Jim shook his head. Flattery. We're going to have to do some fancy footwork to keep your plugs from being pulled for yesterday's piece of work. You know that. Silence. Jim sat and thought. He could record in his logs that the information about the malfeasance had been dug up by the ship's computer, and the statement would be true, and do no one any harm in that form. Moira, I want it understood. You are never to do anything of that kind again, or let anyone know you can. That is an order from the most superior officer aboard. Non-countermandable. Log it.
Aye, aye.
Jim got up. And Moira?
Sir?
Talk to me tomorrow about a race.
Yes, sir.
And James T. Kirk went to bed.
Spock's World was written and abridged by Diane Duane and read by George Takei with Leonard Nimoy as the voice of Spock. Mix engineering and sound design was by Gary Fink. Original music was created by Sam McCallie, Carl Schurtz, and Richard Emmett. Theme music from the Star Trek television series, composed by Alexander Courage and Gene Roddenberry, was used courtesy of Bruin Music. Associate producer was Linda Ross. Spock's World was directed by Audrey Coleman and produced by Carol Shapiro. This program is a Simon & Schuster AudioWorks production.
They paused in the doorway, and not for effect, but because of it. The Hall of Pelasht is one of the largest rooms in the known worlds, nearly a half-mile long, a quarter-mile across, 500 feet up to the roof, and all carved out of the living stone. The hundreds of lamps driven into the walls were tiny and distant as stars. It was rare to feel so oppressed, so dwarfed by an empty space, but Jim did. He held still until his feelings calmed down somewhat. As they entered the room, they heard their names announced.
Captain James T. Kirk. Dr. Leonard E. McCoy. Commander Spock.
Jim did his best to stroll and look unconcerned. It was a long walk. The hall was the sort that could have swallowed the largest party alive, and people were tending to congregate in small groups near the tables, which had been set out in the center with food and drink. They made their way to the nearest of the tables, and there they found Sarek and Amanda and a great many Vulcans. They were introduced to all of them. Jim swore quietly at himself for not taking the time to get the name file or memory enhancement done to his translator. He had always had trouble keeping names straight on first meeting. But the Vulcans, to his own surprise, put him at ease. They treated him with all the courtesy that Sheth had not, and they talked to him as if he were an intelligent being. As he chatted with them, he was once again rather delighted that Vulcans were, in fact, different from one another. A lot of people had the idea that Vulcans were all tall, dark, and slender, men and women alike. But though a large percentage of them did indeed fit into those parameters, there were also short Vulcans, blonde Vulcans, even a redhead. There were delicate, light-boned men and ladies, and stocky ones, and Vulcans who had rather pleasantly ordinary faces, rather than the chiseled good looks that seemed to be the rule. They looked like people, Jim thought, and then had to laugh a little at the idea. Jim got himself a drink,
more of that pure water which was highly prized hereabouts for its sweet taste, and went back to chatting with the group of Vulcans who had gathered around him.
Feeling your weight?
McCoy's voice said from behind him. A little, yes.
Go have a walk in the fresh air. It's actually cooling down out there. It helps a little.
It was another long walk to the door. Jim paused in the doorway, looked around. The air was indeed getting cool, cooler than he had ever felt it. But this was a desert climate after all, probably the archetypal one. He went up one of the sets of stairs to get a better view. The sky had become a marvelous shade of purple blue. Some sunlight still lingered as twilight, and the desert glowed red beneath Tukut. Jim leaned on the railing and wondered how many balconies there were carved into this sheer wall, how many rooms inside the bulk of the fortress itself. To hear Spock tell it, the place was tunneled through and through like a Swiss cheese, with strong rooms, living quarters, lesser halls, stores to hold food against siege. Jim wondered what it would have been like to withstand a siege here, to look down and see those sands full of people shouting for your blood. History. He could never resist history. He hoped there would be time to see this place properly later, if there was a later. His own actions would help to determine that.
Oh, please, let it work out all right,
he said to someone who might or might not be listening. Unlike Spock, he had no certainties on the subject.
Resist this,
a voice said faintly some distance away.
I resist this most strenuously. Why will you force me to this action?
A second voice spoke, a little frail one. Jim thought he might know it from somewhere, and then did know it, and the hair rose on the back of his neck. It was T'Pau.
You know my reasons. Our people must vote rightly, not because our prejudices are exploited, and indeed they have them.
Another voice answered her, Sarek's.
I would not argue that with you, but I resist this course nonetheless.
I will tell thee again, our people must vote rightly. They must not be moved by the advertising campaign that those others conduct to sway the electorate. They must vote for secession because they think it is logical. And to do this, they must hear the truth. No one is better qualified to tell them the truth than you are. You are the keystone, or one of them.
I think the matter of thine own honor is involved in this matter.
When has it not been? I am the eldest. I rule the family. In some ways I rule the planet, and I feel the weight of what I rule. I begin to think I weary of it, but for the time being I will not put down the burden, and neither will the family. Kthia must be observed. The truth must be told. You know the Terrans better than any other Vulcan, and Terra is at the heart of the Federation, as you well know. The species that troubles us, the species whose policies determine those of the Federation, are the humans of Earth. Your course is laid out for you. You may resist it as you like. It will not avail you.
And you, James?
Jim turned around, shocked. There T'Pau stood, looking at him. And in the background, in the shadows, Sarek, looking somewhat diminished. But Jim had eyes only for T'Pau, frail and small, leaning on her carved stick, clothed in plain dark robes now instead of the ceremonial splendor she had worn at the place of marriage and challenge. Jim remembered the hot sand, and her eyes, more scorching than the white sun, pinning him, examining him.
You did not mean to overhear, I am sure, but no matter. You know what Sarek will do?
He will give testimony, and the intent of it will be that Vulcan should secede from the Federation.
Do you know why he will do this?
Because you have told him to. T'Pol drew herself up a little taller, took a step forward.
And he will think that. Certainly, most of your people would think so. They look at me and see the powerful matriarch. They have no idea of the strictures that bind my power. Kthia above all. But they do not understand it. If they did, secession would not be necessary.
Sarek nodded. And perhaps if they did, their diversity from us would be diminished. What is the point of celebrating diversity if one tries to make all the elements of it the same? T'Pol glanced at him, and then back at Jim.
James, there are forces working on this planet who desire this secession mightily. It is not in my right to stop them. They are a symptom of larger forces. They have a right to arise, and they must be allowed to work out the fate of the planet in the open air, under the sky, and the regard of the One, without interference.
Jim was briefly bemused. But you are interfering, or so it seems to me. T'Pol nodded.
I am, but not in the way you think. Some of the forces of which I speak have been excoriating Vulcan's prejudices against Earth people by inflaming their pride, their sense of superiority. To combat such tactics, the only weapon is the truth. Sarek has that truth, and he must tell it in full, no matter what the consequences.
Jim stood still a moment, and then nodded. It had been my intention as well to tell the truth, whatever the consequences. T'Pol looked at him with an expression that might have been approval.
That itself is more powerful a weapon in your hands than any other. I counsel you, bear it as well as you can. I am relieved by what you say, however. I had thought perhaps you would desire to keep Vulcan in the Federation at any cost.
Jim shook his head. I'm not sure that I would want to be in such a federation, or to have on my head the Vulcan that would be in it afterwards.
Then we understand one another.
Jim put an eyebrow up. He was far from understanding her, except in the most roundabout sort of way, and he was resigned to that.
And what will you do should the vote go for secession?
Jim gazed at her a moment, then shook his head and turned away. Leave Vulcan. It was all he could say. He had been refusing as much as possible to think about those consequences, except in the abstract.
Enough. It is illogical to suffer consequences before they befall. Do what you must, James, and know that you are doing right. It is all any of us can do, I fear.
A silence grew long. When Jim turned around again, they were gone. He stood on the balcony until he got his composure back, and then went back to the party. Takut set, dyeing the sands below with the tint of alien blood. Jim sat in his cabin on the Enterprise the next morning, gazing at the small data screen in annoyance.
From Bunks. Date 4611.01. Subject, Our Friends in the Federation. From an editorial published in one of the major Vulcan information services. This bloody sword hanging in our skies, this machine of war, should be ordered away immediately by our government. Yet no action is taken. Creatures who solve their problems with bloodshed rather than reason now orbit our planet without hindrance. Why is it that though they declare their mission to be peaceful, their ships nonetheless are equipped with weapons that could crack a planet open? Can they not perceive even this most massive evidence of illogic? There can be nothing but disaster in dealing with such creatures as if they were civilized. Indeed, we have been trying to civilize them for almost 200 years, but the result of our efforts is apparent in the skies over Tavalsh and Selea.
Yellow journalism? Or green? Jim fumed quietly. On one hand, he was very glad to have seen the message. It certainly confirmed what T'Pau had been saying. But on the other hand, he wanted more and more to know who Bugs was. Not that he could find out, of course. The BBS was one of the places where the crew's privacy had to be respected utterly. There were many messages agreeing with Bugs, annoyed at being considered a bloody sword. There were some who refused to take the quote seriously at all, but it was the last reply to the message that brought Jim up short.
From Lorien, date 4611.72. Subject, Our Friends in the Federation. Eagles don't need to catch flies. A master in leadership needs no mere force to do his job. A master warrior need not indulge in rage to sweep the field. One who's mastered fighting need not even meet his opponent to best him. A master at guiding the strength of others lets them be his strength. Even 4,000 years ago they knew it. Don't believe everything you read.
How about that, Jim thought, and gazed at the screen with interest. Lorien. Who might that be? But he or she or it has a point. A master fighting doesn't need to meet his opponent, openly or otherwise. Now, who in Vulcan has enough power to get something like that into the information services while maintaining a low profile? He started to shut the screen down, then paused for a moment. Bridge, communications.
Communications? Uhura? Good morning, Captain.
So far, yes. There's a screen dump coming into your station. I want to know which Vulcan news service it came from, the name of the author, any other information you find pertinent.
Aye, aye, Captain. I'll pull it off your terminal.
Good. Kirk out. Sick bay.
Sick bay. Burke here.
It was Leah Burke, McCoy's head nurse since Chapel had started working full-time on her doctorate. Leah, where's the doctor?
He's gone down planet already, Captain. Said he was looking for something.
Did he say what?
He said if you called and asked, I was to tell you he was going to buy a gross of paperweights with snowflakes inside them. Sir?
All right. When he comes back, please let him know I've gone to see Sarek and Amanda. I need to talk to him later.
Aye, aye, sir. Sick bay out.
Jim got up and headed for the transporter room. Paperweights, he thought. What's Bones up to? Leonard Edward McCoy was a researcher at heart. Every now and then, a nice, juicy piece of research came his way, and when it did, by God, he got his teeth into it and didn't let go until he was satisfied with the answers. And a nice one had fallen right in his lap yesterday. It had a perfect feeling about it, the kind of feeling he had when, as a kid, he would be out on the North 40 and find a big flat rock that he knew had lots of bugs under it. It was Shat that did it to him. Not that the sun wasn't just the most irritating thing he had come across in a long time, but the man's body language was wrong, completely wrong. On seeing himself and Kirk, the guy had actually had to leave the room for many minutes to regain his composure. It would have been unusual in a human. It was positively shocking in a Vulcan, and the reaction was not to him, McCoy felt certain, but to Kirk. He had considered going up to the consulate and demanding to see the man again, fabricating some story about a change in schedule. But on second thought, McCoy felt that would be unsubtle. No, he would get his information in other ways. He spent a little time in his cabin that morning calling up detailed maps of Shikar, the little city nearest the Science Academy, and found what he wanted, the electronic equivalent of the public library. He could have gotten into it from the ship via downlink from the main computers, but he had no desire to attract quite that much attention. He stopped in to check sickbay, found everything well, and then beamed down to the streets of Shikar. The library turned out to be a noble building of the same golden stone as most of the rest of the town. Inside, everything was utterly modern. Computer carols and voice accesses were everywhere. He nodded a greeting to the librarian at the front desk and headed on past him toward the carols. He did not trust his typing in Vulcan. He stopped by one of the keyboarded carols and peered at the keying area. It had more keys and levers and switches than he wanted to see, so he passed on to a voice-activated carol and sat down. Softly he cleared his throat, praying that his Vulcan accent wouldn't be too outrageous for the machine to understand. General query.
Acknowledged.
Public events. Cross-index to registry. Kun Ut Khalifi. Familial name uncertain. One participant for cross-index, Spock Cha Sarek. Go. The machine thought about this for a second, then brought up a picture of the place of marriage and challenge. Spock, McCoy, and Kirk in the background, T'Pau on her litter, and an assortment of spear carriers and extras with bell banners and various implements of destruction. McCoy shivered at the sight of the place and was surprised at his own reaction. What a horrendous day that was, and what a naughty thing I did. He smiled a little. And worth it. Confirmed. Display list of participants. Obediently it did so, and there it was. Shath Chastelin He Neklava, age 43 standard years. Query. General information. Shath Chastelin. Another page of information came up. Most of it was about education and occupation, but at the bottom was a little list of affiliated organizations, which McCoy had the Carroll's printer note down. The names were mostly very innocent. The Institute for Interworld Studies, the Study Group on Non-Vulcanoid Species. But what McCoy noticed as he began reading their newsletters and newspapers was that none of the organizations Shath belonged to liked humans very much. Their attitudes varied from condescension to outright hatred. It was shocking. There were Vulcan bigots right here, where Serac wrote and taught and died, where he had laid down the very center of the Vulcan creed of nonviolence. The spear in the other's heart is the spear in your own. You are he. Damn.
Null input.
Sorry. Cross-reference. List of membership of all the above organizations. Indicate members who are also members of other listed organizations.
Working. Output mode.
Print and solid, please. The machine began spitting out truly astonishing amounts of the fine, thin plastic that Vulcans used for printouts, and did not stop for 20 minutes. Finally, McCoy found himself staring at a stack of printouts some 3 inches thick, all in very tiny print. Then the data solid emerged, a little flat block on top of the printout. And thank you. He got up and left the library, making his way to a little restaurant that Spock had told him about. It was open early, as most Vulcan restaurants and refectories were, for the day meal. He sat down, asked for a fruit drink and some vegetables, and started going through the printout.
It was going to be a long morning, or so he thought. 5 minutes into his reading, he found a name that brought him bolt upright in his chair. Very soon thereafter, he found it again, and again. Damn! After a long time, he put the printout aside and ate his lunch, even though he wasn't sure he had the appetite for it anymore.
Science Officer's Personal Log, Stardate 3726.23. Every 7 years, male Vulcans of a certain age fall prey to the mating urge. If they do not go home to mate, to marry the woman chosen in childhood, they die. When I began to suffer from the blood fever, the captain defied direct orders from Starfleet Command in order to get me home to Vulcan. I then asked him and Dr. McCoy to accompany me to the ceremony. We beamed down into a remote desert place, the mating ground for my family for many thousands of years, and were joined by the wedding party. Among them, T'Pau, the ancient and venerable head of my family, and T'Pring, the beautiful young woman who was to be my bonded mate. There, however, things began to go wrong. T'Pring, for various reasons, did not want me anymore. By ancient Vulcan right, she demanded that I fight for her with the opponent of her choice, and she chose the captain. Her hope was that I would kill the captain, renounce her in disgust, and leave her free to bond with Ston, another young Vulcan man. Indeed, deep in the blood fever of Vulcan mating, I almost did kill Jim. But a little inspired trickery by Dr. McCoy got the captain safely off the mating ground and back up to the Enterprise. I soon came to my senses, and I gave T'Pring to Ston, warning her that having what one wanted might not always be as satisfying as one might think. It all seems a long time ago now.
The world dissolved from sparkle to solidity around Jim as he beamed down. He went up to the gate in the wall and touched the annunciator plate. "James Kirk."
"Jim,"
Amanda's voice replied.
"Come on in."
The gate swung open for him, and there was Amanda, wearing a coverall rather stained around the knees, with a pair of pruning shears in her hand.
"Welcome. Come in and see my garden."
"Goodness, you've got quite a collection of exotics here. You've been pruning those roses back pretty hard."
"I haven't been here for 2 years, remember? We have a gardener who comes in and takes care of things, but he's best with the native Vulcan succulents. I don't think Vulcans really understand about roses. They think they're delicate, but to bring out the best in them, you have to be mean to them."
"I have trouble believing you could be mean to anything."
"Flatterer,"
Amanda said, smiling.
"You know, there were a lot of times when we were raising Spock that I felt I was being mean to him. At the same time, I felt I had to. Sarek and I agreed that Spock needed to grow up as a normal Vulcan child, with the disciplines that Vulcan children have to deal with. If we had been on Earth, it might have been different. Earth people are a little more flexible about such things, but Vulcans, they expect you to be very conservative. Everything has to meet the status quo. Everything has to be the same."
"May I ask you something?"
"Ask."
"You're pruning the roses as if everything was going to turn out all right."
"Well, I'm a gardener. No matter what happens, the roses need pruning. But you're right, I'm worried. If the vote for secession goes through, the ban will certainly fall on me. The government will certainly not be in a mood to allow exceptions, certainly not at the highest levels. It would be seen as favoritism. I will have to leave, Vulcan. or Sarek will. It doesn't seem fair. Oh, there's nothing fair about it. But if the vote goes for secession, I gave up one home a long time ago. I suppose I can manage it again.
Giving up a home isn't the same as giving up a husband, though.
We will find somewhere else, I suppose. The Federation would be glad to have Sarek, and Spock certainly is in no danger of losing his present job.
Lord, no.
But at the same time, think of it from Sarek's point of view. To have to leave your home world forever, never again to see the rest of your family, to be an exile on cold, damp worlds, never to feel a sun that's warm enough, or if you do, to have it shining on you in a strange sky.
Another voice broke in on them from the house. "You must excuse my wife, Captain. She is apparently practicing the Scots part of her heritage, which she has described to me as predicting gloom and doom."
Did your business in town go well?
Sarek sat down beside them. "As well as could be expected. The town is becoming positively tense. A state rather unusual for Vulcans."
Tomorrow we start debate?
"Tomorrow. Some of the less, shall we say, loaded testimonies will come first. Then, among others, the professional liaisons, such as ambassadors and starship captains."
It's McCoy.
Amanda got up to greet him at the door. Sarek looked slightly concerned. "The doctor sounds winded. I hope he is well. The heat can take people by surprise here." Amanda ushered McCoy in a few moments later. He was sweating and was wearing an expression that Jim had seen on him before, a combination of excitement and dread. "Bones, are you all right?" "No. Here, look at this. Sarek, I was out following up a hunch I'd had. These anti-Federation, anti-Terran organizations that have been around the past century or so. I was doing some reading of their latest publications this morning. No wonder you look distressed." McCoy shook his head unhappily. "It gets worse. I pulled their membership list and did some correlation. Jim, Shath is pretty prominent among them. But you know who else is?" Jim stared at the printout, looking at a circled name on one list. "T'Pring! T'Pring! T'Pring!" They all looked at one another. Sarek looked nonplussed, Amanda amazed and angry, McCoy apprehensive, Jim simply astonished. Bones glanced over at Jim. "I think we'd better call Spock and let him in on this." Jim nodded while Bones got out his communicator. "Dear Lord," he thought. "T'Pring. I think we're in trouble." Spock shook his head. "Most disturbing. It is indeed most disturbing." Spock and Jim and McCoy were sitting in one corner of the rec room after dinner at Sarek's and Amanda's. That's the understatement of the year. Spock, I thought she was the great logical one, after all that business at the place of marriage and challenge. She seems to have changed her mind. People change, Doctor. Vulcans no less than humans. But I will be very, very interested indeed to find out what the extent of her involvement in this business is, and what her motives might be. Jim frowned. "I have my suspicions. Revenge for being ditched?" "If so, Captain, it will be an epic revenge, and I am curious how she has been managing it." "Well, Uhura came back to me with the information about that clipping. It comes from one of the names on Bones' list, the writer, Selv, who seems to be doing so much of this work. Now it was Spock's turn to frown. Selv. I seem to remember that name from somewhere. McCoy looked surprised. You don't know him, Spock? No, Doctor. But we will soon enough. As for T'Pring, Spock looked indecisive, a rather surprising expression for him. Generally, when one has a query to make of a bonded Vulcan woman, one does so through her bondmate. Doctor, is Staun's name mentioned anywhere in your list? McCoy flipped through to the first group of S's, a considerable number, and then to the rest. I don't see it. I'll run a check with the copy I have on Solid. Please do so, Doctor. I would find it very interesting if Staun's name were not somehow involved as well. Spock, are there any indications of the odds shifting at all? According to the computer, they are getting much worse. Jim made a wry face. Well, we'll just have to do our best. It's all we can do. I have to admit, I wish I could be a little fly on the wall when you have your talk with T'Pring. Why would you desire to be a winged insect, and specifically a small one? You know perfectly well what I mean. More often than I used to, yes. Good night, Jim. Night, Spock.
Why do you people go for size all the time? Can't you do anything small?
Spock looked resigned. The space in which McCoy, Kirk, and Spock stood the next morning was, if anything, larger than the Hall of Pelasht, all made of smooth, cool-colored blue-gray stone. The ceiling was as high as Pelasht's, and shafts cut through it let in the sunlight in bright, slanting columns. McCoy was staring around at it all in good-natured annoyance.
Why do Vulcans like to conduct their business in railroad stations? Can you just tell me that?
Doctor, I believe what you are complaining about is pre-Reformation architecture. At any rate, the debates proper will not be held in this room, so you may relax. You won't have to shout.
Spock?
Sarek called. Regal in his dark ambassadorial robes, he came over to meet them. Father, I was not expecting to see you here today. Your testimony does not begin until tomorrow.
I had hoped to meet you before you went in, that is all. Doctor, after your revelation about T'Pring, I made a discreet inquiry or two. It seems that Staun is dead. Jim glanced at Bones and at Spock. How did he die, sir? Privacy seal was invoked on the information. Spock put up one eyebrow, which means that it is likely to involve Plaktau in some manner. Sarek nodded. Precisely. At any rate, T'Pring is now a free agent. I thought you ought to know. Thank you, Father. I must go now. I hope you find the morning illuminating. Gentlemen. And he was off, all dignity, though it was amazing how fast dignity could move when it had appointments elsewhere. McCoy watched him go, then glanced back at Spock. Well, well, well. We should not begin discussing this here, Doctor. Let us go into the Hall of the Voice and let them know we are present. They walked off toward one side of the great entry hall to a group of doors, all of which stood open. There was a young woman standing there, tapping away busily at a computer keyboard. As Spock approached, she looked up and said, "Attendee or testifier?" Testifier, Spock. With me, McCoy, Leonard E., and Kirk, James T.
Row 8, seats 1 through 3. Someone will be around to you with your schedule, sir.
And a program?
McCoy looked at the young woman with a slightly mischievous expression and said, "I want popcorn." The young woman looked up at him from underneath very pertly slanted brows and said calmly,
"No eating in the auditorium, sir. Next."
They headed in. Spock was looking bemused. McCoy was grinning.
"Bones, you cut it out. Just for that. You're not getting the aisle seat.
Spoil sport." They found their seats, and the place filled up around them fairly quickly. There were a surprising number of non-Vulcans in attendance, but no more than about 1,000 all told, in a place that could hold 15,000 easily. Vulcans filled the rest of those seats silently. Watching them, McCoy leaned over toward Spock.
"Do they sing the national anthem?"
"No, nor does the fat lady sing, I am afraid. The debates will merely be called to order and begin." The audience started to become quiet, as if they saw or heard some signal that Jim had missed. He looked around him, but saw nothing but impassive Vulcans everywhere. Then one walked out onto the stage, and Jim winced a little. It was Shath.
"On behalf of the government of all Vulcan, I declare these proceedings to be open. Testifiers will please state their affiliation, their position on the proposal, and then make their statement."
Shath consulted a datapad that he was carrying.
"Number 1, please."
There came a soft chiming sound from the far side of the audience, and Jim could see a lot of heads over there turn in curiosity. He smiled as a small, bright form, like a giant 12-legged glass spider, stepped into the shafts of sunlight at the stage's center. Her voice filled the place as the amp field found and focused on her.
"Is it all going to be this exciting, I wonder?"
"I suspect it'll heat up a little when we go on, Bones."
2 more speakers followed, an elderly Vulcan woman and a handsome young Tellarite. Then there was a break for the noon heat. The debating would resume 3 hours later, after lunch.
"Spock, can you suggest somewhere to eat around here?"
"Yes. The Naklanta in the old city is very good indeed. I will give you the coordinates, but I will not be with you." McCoy looked surprised. "Where are you going?" "I think you would say, I need to talk to my ex." The house was big, bigger than his father's. More than that, it was ostentatious. The gardens were full of imports from other planets, tender plants that required an exorbitant amount of water to keep. Taken together as a whole, house and grounds said loudly to every passerby that the one who owned this place had all the money they needed and few wants. Spock walked to the front entrance and touched the annunciator. It was a while before the answer came.
"Yes?"
Spock. For nearly 2 minutes, nothing happened. He was about to turn away, but then the door opened. T'Pring was almost exactly as he had last seen her. Cool, slender, tall, extremely beautiful. The exotically tilted eyes examined him. "I did not think you would come," she said. "Explain." T'Pring lifted an eyebrow. "I did not think you would have the courage. Come in if you like." "Very well. I have come to ask you what your involvement is in the present situation." This time, both eyebrows went up. "I caused it. Surely your logic has led you that far, unless humans have completely addled your wits." "My logic led me that far." T'Pring's look of scorn faded for the moment. "Ston died." "I heard. I grieve with you." It was not quite a lie. T'Pring sat quite still and erect on the bench across from him, her hands folded in her lap, meeting his gaze without flinching as she spoke.
When Ston took me after the challenge, after your captain gave me up, we lived well enough together for a time, but I was discontented. The matter had not gone as I had planned at the Kun Ut Khalifi.
This was delivered in utter coolness of expression, but T'Pring's voice had something of a very small child about it, a balked child, angry because it did not get the sweet it wanted.
Ston grew discontented himself, thinking that perhaps I desired you again. He attempted to induce Plak Tau in himself prematurely, to make me desire him.
Spock nodded. There were drugs that could be used for this. They were risky, but some Vulcans felt that no joining was real unless it happened in the blood madness.
He died of a hormonal imbalance. He had made me mistress of his estates, and though they were small, they satisfied my needs. But as time passed, I came to realize that once again, you had robbed me. You and your captain. It was fear of your desire that had made Ston take the drugs. Once again, I did not have what I wanted. And once again, it was your fault.
Spock held quite still.
So I decided to take from you such things as you had taken from me. Your work, your captain, and anything else I could manage that would cause you such pain as you have caused me. I found that there were many of our people who were prejudiced against Earth. It seemed to me that my weapon lay ready to my hand. So I began first to invest the proceeds of Ston's estate with some care. I did very well. Then I began making substantial donations to various organizations and publications. I found Vulcans who were willing to say the things about Earth people that make Vulcans angriest against them. I took my time. Slowly, a groundswell of opinion started to build up. It fed on itself, for people will say things that they hear others say, whether they truly believe them or not. I bribed some government officials who had found their posts diminished by the influence of Terrans on Vulcan. I suborned various media and data network personnel to add emphasis to certain stories and downplay others. Slowly the public came to perceive a problem with Earth, and the government grew uneasy themselves, fearing for their positions. When it became plain that the electorate wanted a chance to secede from the Federation, the government complied quickly enough.
She smiled just a little. It was a wintry look.
And so we find ourselves where we are today. If all goes well, we will soon be out of the Federation, and it will be forever beyond your power to take anything from me again. For you will either stay here and lose your starship and your captain, without which you are nothing, or you will go into exile with him, and your father and your mother will become exiles as well, and I shall be well avenged indeed.
It was almost a minute before Spock could find his voice. Then all he could say was what he had said before. Flawlessly logical.
I thank you. Is there anything else I can tell you?
Spock shook his head.
Then I will ask you to leave. I think perhaps you will see me once more. I shall come to the Hall of the Voice to watch you and your captain plead for leniency for terror. I shall find it most amusing.
I dare say you shall. Spock got up. She saw him to the door.
Farewell, Spock.
Live long. And the rest stuck in his throat. He left the house, walked out to the quiet, dusty road, and called the Enterprise, and beamed up, feeling, for the first time in his adult life, without Dr. McCoy's help, faintly sick to his stomach.
Number 6,
said Shath. McCoy stepped up there with great calm, considering that those who spoke before him had been vehemently anti-Federation. Jim thought he was being even calmer than he needed to be. McCoy stood in the shafts of downpouring sunlight, glanced up at them for a moment, and then looked once right around the room, as if taking the measure of it.
"My name is Leonard Edward McCoy," he said,
and the focusing field caught his voice and threw it out to the back of the room all around.
"I hold the rank of Commander in the Starfleet of the United Federation of Planets. My position is Chief Medical Officer of the Starship Enterprise. And as regards the secession of Vulcan, my position is hell no."
There were chuckles from some of the humans present, a bemused stirring from some of the Vulcans.
"I want to keep this on a friendly basis, despite the fact that some of you are feeling decidedly unfriendly toward Terrans. I'm here to ask you, as a planet, not to pull out of what has been a very successful affiliation for everyone involved."
Bones walked around the stage for a moment, his hands clasped behind him. Jim had to smile. He had seen this particular pacing mannerism many times before, while McCoy tried to figure out the best way to deliver some piece of good or bad news.
"The first thing I would want to say to you is that it is illogical to wound again what is already healing. Or as my mother used to say, if you don't stop picking at it, it'll never get better."
A soft sound of amusement ran around the hall. McCoy smiled very slightly.
"Most of the agreements going on these days between Terrans or the Federation and Vulcan are in the nature of band-aids. One of our species hurt the other somewhere. The other said sorry and put a bandage on it. It's a usual thing you see when you see two children playing together. At first they hurt one another a lot."
"Our species is hardly a child compared with yours."
McCoy searched the audience with his eyes.
"That depends on how you reckon it. Certainly your species was making bombs, guns, missiles, and such, while ours was still mostly played with sharpened sticks and stone knives. But I'm not sure that's a virtue. And Terra's people have kicked a lot fewer shins per capita than Vulcan has. You have several times almost reduced your population to below the viability level. It took a miracle to save you. We may be a bloody, barbaric lot of savages, but we never went that far, even when we first came up with atomics."
He chuckled softly at the slight silence that fell.
"Yes, you saw that article in the data nets last night, too, some of you. Where is Sim? You in here?"
The voice came from not too far from where Jim and Spock sat.
"Here."
"Aha, Sim. It might help if you went to Earth someday and checked out what you talk about so blithely."
"The data about Earth speaks for itself."
McCoy's eyes flashed.
"No data speaks for itself. Data just lies there. People speak.
Sel, you don't even understand our languages, and this is made pretty clear by some of the material you claim to be translating from Earth publications. An Andorian spirit dancer with a Ouija board and a Scrabble set could do a better job. Though I must admit I really like the article on the evolution of the blood sacrifice in Terran culture. That is not what Major League Football is for.
McCoy let the laugh from the humans die down.
Anyway, where was I? Agreements as bandages. Every species in this galaxy that bumps into another one bruises it a little. Some of them run home crying and never come out again. That's their problem. I, for one, would like them to come out and play.
And be exploited? The Federation's record of violations of the Prime Directive has been well documented.
Sel, I love you. How many violations of the Prime Directive have there been?
There was a brief, frantic silence.